haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to create and publish your podcast. It's free. That's right, free to download. With built-in tools to help you record and edit your podcast from your cell phone or any smart device. Anchor also distributes your podcast on virtually any platform that streams podcasts, like Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple and Google Podcasts, and many more. You can even monetize your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is your one-stop app for podcasting. Remember, it's free. Go to anchor.fm to create some amazing content.
Powered by Riverside.
Welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. We have uncensored conversations. We exchange information. We provide a ton of resources. This podcast is not, I repeat, is not and will not ever be about therapy. We do all kinds of things, but we don't do therapy on this podcast. If you're triggered at any point during this podcast, and I mean at any point and you need help immediately, please call 911. That will get you one of three resources: EMS, fire, police. If you don't have an immediate need, but you still need help, we provide information in the show notes for every podcast. We have the numbers and websites for the following: domestic violence, which is what we cover. We have the number and website for sex trafficking and human trafficking. Also, sexually based offenses. We refer you to a company called RAIN, which is Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. We cover true crimes. Every show that we do, at the end of each episode, we cover a missing person case. And those cases typically are melanated men, women, and children, because we want to bring the same media attention and coverage to those that are kidnapped, runaway, or abducted. We also will cover cases under the true crime banner, as we did last year, if the person is not missing, but they were killed under mysterious circumstances and their killer or killers haven't been brought to justice. Because we're doing true crime now, we will cover those cases similarly to what we did last year. We're going to be talking about the case, and this case is decades old, of a young lady, a young girl who was missing back in the 60s. Her name is HATTIE YVONNE Jackson. I'm going to read you her information from one of our favorite sources, the Charlie Project. Their website is charlieproject.org. And again, it's HATTIE YVONNE Jackson. If you have issues with substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, drugs, if you are a supporter of someone with one of those issues, we provide three sources of information also. So we have the number and website to AA, NA, which is Narcotics Anonymous, and Al-Anon. And finally, if you are suicidal at any point, if you know somebody that's suicidal, if you come across somebody that's a stranger that's suicidal and they need help, call 988. 988 is the number that's available 24/7. It's toll free here in the United States, and they will get you help for any other behavioral health issues. So they can refer you to other agencies. This 988 number was started nationwide in July of last year by the U.S. government. So those are all of the things that we offer to you. If you need additional information and resources about anything, you can always send us an email and we will point you in the right direction. But those are some great starting points. We have a very special guest in the building today, my Missouri brother, Mr. Albert Grieve. He's an attorney. We're going to be talking about a number of things today. We're going to be talking about domestic violence, traumas, dads or fathers, and the law. And Mr. Albert, being an attorney, one of the things that I appreciate, and I'm going to give him his flowers for before he comes on, is the fact that this young man not only has practiced law, he also worked for the state of Missouri in the Division of Family Services, or what most people call Child Protective Services. You know, for that work to be done is very taxing, not only on the employees, because I have a friend also that is a former coworker of Albert's who used to be one of my EMS partners. Uh, we go home with these cases, not just the files. I'm talking about the emotional baggage that we carry. We love kids. Y'all heard me say this before. LP loves the kids. So I imagine and I presume that Albert and others that work for Child Protective Services nationwide have the same feeling. And one of the things that Albert focuses on is stopping generational abuse, neglect, and domestic violence. He also is an author, and he's going to talk about his journey. He's going to talk about the work that he does, and I'm going to be the guinea pig for this podcast. Right now, when I say I'm going to be the guinea pig, I'm going to use myself in a number of questions that I'm going to throw to Albert that I want him to focus on answering regarding my story, because I haven't told my story in a podcast on my own platform. I've talked about it in other podcasts on other platforms. So I'm going to be the guinea pig on my own podcast today. Albert, welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Man, being a young attorney, a young African-American attorney, I'm sure that you are such a sought after person by a number of entities, whether they've reached out to you yet or not. We'll talk about that later. Okay. As an attorney, because I've been trying to get my wife to go to law school, but that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. She does want to get her doctorate in criminology. We'll talk about that too. I want to ask you a number of questions before we get started, deep diving into this stuff. You're from Missouri, my home state. What made you even interested in getting into the law?
My background is what has always driven me to this field. I actually grew up in California. I was a product of the system, Child Protective Services, like you say. Here in Missouri, it's Missouri Children's Division. But I grew up in a very violent situation. And let's just say I don't wish my childhood on anyone. So everything I've done for all my scholastic endeavors, all my career endeavors has been in pursuit of preventing domestic violence and child abuse to others. So I went to HBCU, Lincoln University. I'm sure you're familiar in Jeff City. Sure. I went to HBCU, and then after that, I was with the Jefferson City Police Department for several years. And I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't the best at drug interdiction or DWIs, but I most actively pursued the most felony domestic violence cases because I could put myself in their shoes. I knew how to ask questions in a different way. I was able to connect with them on a different level. I was able to elicit more information, which I can turn over to a prosecuting attorney. After working there, I interned with the Cole County Prosecutor's Office for a little bit, actually before even attending law school, which is kind of abnormal. I went to SLU Law while I was there. I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Circuit Attorney's Office, and I had the opportunity to clerk with the magistrate judge. Afterwards, I went to Division of Legal Services, Department of Social Services. I represented Children's Division. So like my whole adult life really has been trying to prevent others from going through what I went through. And I'm in a fortunate position because I'm not homeless, on drugs, incarcerated, like so many people that have gone through what I have. And so I feel like it's my duty, my obligation to try to give back because I'm able to do so. And I can speak from a position of experience, having walked in both worlds, really, being one on the receiving end of the system and then someone trying to make changes in the system from within.
Your law enforcement experience, how long were you in law enforcement?
So I did about 3 years active, and then I stayed on as a reserve officer until I got too busy in law school. So I'd say about 4 years-ish altogether.
What was it like when you received your juris?
Man,
what was that day like?
Man, it felt great because there's nobody in my family. I was the first one in my family, my whole family tree, to go to college. So to get a terminal degree like a Juris Doctorate, it felt amazing. I felt such a sense of empowerment. And it reinforces that education is one of the things that really can save you when you're in such a bad situation. You learn so much about yourself, but it enables you to get into a different station in life, right? The education opens up doors and you can use your experiences to give back.
I literally got goosebumps right now because I'm just such a proponent of, us melanated folks seeking higher education, even though we know that there are many careers that don't require you to have even a college degree. It always is just a great thing when I see people that look like me that have achieved these postgraduate degrees, have achieved such a high level of success in academia, and who actually love the law. Like I love the law. I don't like every law. I don't like everything that the law does in certain situations. When we look at the law, other laws in other countries, I say we got some of the best laws on the planet. Of course, they can be better. Of course, they can be different. Of course, they can be more inclusive.
Yeah.
You know, however, they are what they are, and that's why people like yourself and myself and others have to continue to do the work that we're doing because those actions and activities help foster changes in the laws. You and I have kind of talked about some of these things off air and in other formats. I
I
want
just
to,
want, if I may, I just want to give you an example too. Outside of domestic violence and child abuse,
yeah,
just knowing the law, I haven't been pulled over in forever, but I just got back from Nebraska. It was a long trip, had all my kids in the car. I was going a little too fast. But when I got pulled over and I saw those lights like in my rearview mirror, I wasn't scared. I knew the law. I put on a uniform. I was good. So I pulled over, had my license ready. Trooper came to the side. I was in the wrong, and I knew I was in the wrong, but it was actually a good experience. I wasn't afraid of getting tasered or anything like that. I didn't even get a ticket. He let me go on my way. I put it back on cruise control. But I mean, just that in and of itself, knowing what to do when you get pulled over and how to respond and how to engage with a law enforcement officer in the right way, knowing where you're at and all that. Education is it's so powerful.
absolutely. One of the things that I tell people, because I grew up in a family of cops. My dad, who's not my biological dad, he was a chief of police in one of the municipalities in St. Louis County, and his brothers are in law enforcement too. And so he didn't want me to be a cop, but he was like, "I'm cool if you work in any capacity with law enforcement as a, civilian or whatever." So I used to do IT work for their department. And then I got into EMS in '06. So for me, I'm the same way. I do have concerns if I get pulled over because you never know who the cop is going to be and what their mindset is going to be. It could be a simple traffic infraction or something like that. And I'm like you, I don't have this innate fear that I'm going to die in that particular incident because whether I know what I got pulled over for or not, I'm not in that mindset of being combative. I'm not in the mindset. And let me say before I say what I say, I'm not saying that every person that gets pulled over, especially the ones that are melanated like us, are being combative or being disrespectful or being belligerent or none of that stuff. I'm talking about me. I'm not in the mindset of doing anything to cause that situation to go south.
Right.
So all my stuff is correct. My license, my insurance, my registration, my tags, all of that stuff. Everything is correct. I have all the windows down. I pull the car over. I got the hazards on. I'm not making any bunch of movements and all that stuff or whatever. You don't have to say sir. You don't have to say ma'am. Yes, it's great. No, it's great. I'm not raising my voice any higher. I'm not lowering it any lower. I'm speaking in a plain conversation or whatever. Hey, what do you need for me to do? Is this going to be a ticketed situation? If so, okay, I'll take it. Do I have to sign somewhere? Because even on the ticket, it tells you signing this is not an admission of guilt.
Right. Just means you're going to get taken care of.
Yeah, it's just an admission that you've received this ticket.
Not a mission, just acknowledgement that you're going to get taken care of.
I'm sorry.
This is your accusation. You're going to have your day in court. That's it. Now, if you don't sign it, it means you're not going to get taken care of. And that's how a lot of people get tripped up. And they get those nice little iron handcuffs.
Yeah, acknowledgement. See, that's why we got a lawyer on that. That's all.
No, but for me too, it was really interesting because I had all of my three boys. My wife was working at the time, but my 17-year-old son was behind me. And even though I feel the way I do as far as law enforcement, I've had those conversations. I've had to. I mean, when Ferguson riots were going on, I made him watch it, and he didn't like. But I've been pounding that into him, because he likes, for instance, he's track star. He likes to go running. I will not let them run in my neighborhood late at night with a hoodie. And I was like, it's just not gonna happen. I'm just not, you know what I'm saying? But he saw the traffic stop. He saw me get pulled over. Like when I got pulled over, I'm like, okay, so a ticket's gonna cost me about $234 because I'm gonna have to get an attorney. They're gonna change it to a non-moving violation. I don't have any priors. I have no points on my license. You know, so I'm just thinking through the consequences, right? I'm not afraid of getting arrested or anything like that.
Yeah.
My bad. I was speeding. This is how I'm gonna have to deal with it. But I was cool with him. He saw my demeanor and everything. Give me a warning. He didn't have to give me a ticket. You know, so I know the song and dance, and I know how to be able to approach it. So just in and of itself, that education, so you don't have to escalate it unnecessarily, right? And like you said, I was legit. I'm clean, tags, insurance, the whole. Actually, I did not have my insurance card on me, but I can pull it up on my phone. So
and that's important because one of the things that I tell people, especially like my daughter, she'll be 18 in April. She started driving last year. So we're going through all the stuff that you and I just talked about. And I'm like, you don't fight it on the street. That's not the place to resolve the issue. The place to resolve the issue is court. That's why they have courts. That's why they have judges. That's why they have lawyers. Like, I'd rather you get the ticket and come home than me get a call saying I got identified.
In court. You know how often they just don't go to court? You got a warrant for failure to appear. I mean, it's something so simple, but it happens all the time. Like, just don't go to court. Like, I forgot the date. You know, oh my God. Like, really? You know, I arrested so many people I went to college with because they had a failure to appear. I'm like, man, for real. I mean, you know better. Like, you know, I'm lecturing them in the back of the car the whole way to jail. Like, come on, man, you know better, man. Call me, right?
I want to give people a bit of information. Okay. We're talking about these things because this is part of this topic, which is domestic violence, traumas, dads, and the law. And the reason that we're having this particular conversation about the law, and we're going to talk about some other things in the law too. I throw domestic violence a huge blanket, a huge umbrella, I should say. I have a very expansive view of how domestic violence is defined, and we're going to talk about this right now. For me, domestic violence, if you look at the words that are put together, violence is violence. Domestic is wherever you've domesticated yourself. It's where you live. It's where you reside. It's where you feel comfortable. You know, something that you've kind of personalized. You know, to me, domestic violence does not just happen under your roof and between your four walls. We live here in the United States. When we get these breaking news stories, whether it's an active shooter situation, whether it's an active violent incident situation at a school or a business or a house of worship, because like what happened at the University of Idaho, that young man did not use a gun or a firearm or any explosive. He had a sharp edged weapon. So when I tell people, stop just talking about active shooter situations, because everything does not involve a firearm. And when we're talking about domestic violence, I look at those situations and I throw them under the umbrella of domestic violence, because these acts have the same effect and emotional pull and tug on you, just like if it happened to you in your home. When I look at the story about what happened in Buffalo, I was talking to a guy who was the first responder during that time in Buffalo a week ago. And, you know, one of the things he talked about was how it affects the community even to this day. You know, when we saw what happened in Brooklyn on the subway, you know, people were still talking about that. They just had an anniversary of the Parkland school shooting recently. I went to St. Louis last year after the school shooting at Central VPA. You know, my aunt went to that school, and my twin boys went to that school. We used to live in the neighborhood. When I see these situations, I don't have any different feeling than if it was a story about a woman getting beat or a man getting traumatized at home from their partner or their family member or whatever. So when I look at domestic violence, I look at it more expansive, because whether you're at home, whether you're at a house of worship, at a school, a place of business, these violent acts are happening where you domesticated. You know, when you go to work, a lot of people have personal items at their desk. I know for me at the fire department, I had some personal things there because we did 48-hour shifts, you know, 2 days on, 4 days off or whatever. Go in people's workplaces and they got all kind of pictures of their families and on their desk and their offer. So when these acts of violence happen, you feel traumatized even more, because it's like, this is my second home. How many people say their workplace is their second home? Their school is their second home. You know, you lived on campus, I presume, when you were at Lincoln University. That was your second home. So imagine if something happened there when you were a student. You're going to feel just as bad as if it happened at home.
Yeah, I just want to add for domestic, remember it's that relationship. That's what separates it apart.
It's the relationship.
Right? Relationship is what makes it, that separates an assault from domestic violence. You know, it's your paramour, right? It's someone you have a close relationship. Just think of like child abuse. You know, if a child is hurt, they're usually going to turn to their parent for comfort and support. Well, it may be their actual parent that's harming them. So it sets it apart. It's what makes it more a worse type of thing, a higher level, right? You know, if I want to go to my spouse for like to work through some issue that I had, but it's my spouse that's actually harming me, right? That's what separates it apart. So the relationship is key in domestic violence. But I take your point that wherever you're domesticated and stuff, it could still have the same type of impact, right? You're still as vulnerable, right? This is where I live. This is my home. Where else am I supposed to turn? So when you have those active shooter or other types of events in that same area, the impact may be very similar in a traumatic type of way.
See, this is why I love having the experts on the podcast, because they can add to the stuff that I put out there. They can give correction. They can give updates. They can give clarifications. And I'm good with all of that stuff. I'm not above reproach. I don't feel like I sit on the mountain of, mount knowledge. One more thing about domestic violence. For you, being an attorney, being in law enforcement previously, and working for Children's Division, when you think of domestic violence, how does that work for you in your mind? Like, what is your approach coming from your experience, not just from law enforcement, but personally?
All right. So I'm going to just pick a direction with the question, if that's all right. For me, it's all about connection, right? So for a lot of law enforcement, domestic violence are messy, right? It's one of the most dangerous calls you can go on. Let's just say they determined who the dominant physical aggressor is and they go to effect an arrest on them. Then they're being attacked by the survivor, right? And a lot of cops don't understand that. And so for me, it's connection. You know, I want to be there because I want to try to help them, to save them. And I know it's messy and complicated, but for me, it's worth putting in the time, because those are the types of cases where you can save lives and change family trees. I did not care as much about a shoplifter. In fact, I got in trouble once. I went to Conoco for a shoplifting, and it was a Bic lighter. I offered the manager $2 for the Bic lighter, so I didn't have to do a report. I could move on to something that I viewed as more important. But for me, it's all about connection, just being over there and being able to give them a voice and give them the tools, not only to protect them in the moment, not to slap a temporary Band-Aid on it, but to help them moving forward, to give them the tools to protect themselves. And so that's the primary work I do right now, is training law enforcement and prosecutors and victim advocates, CD, juvenile office on domestic violence, on trying to identify these warning signs and what to do with it. Don't just identify a red flag, but what to go forward in. So to me, it's my calling, it's my passion, it's something I'm driven to do. But my God, man, we are under-resourced. There is not enough training out there. We got a request to do a training, I won't say what county, but the sheriff had identified an unmet need. Something happened that made it clear their officers didn't quite know how to respond to domestic violence, because it's really a different type of call for service, right? But the closest we were able to schedule a training is in June. And so it just dawned on me. I was like, man, if you're in that county and you're calling 911, there's a good chance that responding law enforcement may not know best how to provide the services you need. And so that's what it means to me, is being able to try to help. You know, if I can make good come from my past, if I can weaponize it and aid other practitioners to combat domestic violence and abuse, that's the connection. That's all. It's what it's about.
I'm going to give you the mic because we're about to jump into the meat of the interview.
Okay.
The reason I asked you that particular question, it was very intentional, even though it was kind of a broad question. So let me let you and the audience know why I asked that question. I always think from the minds, even though I'm retired as a first responder, as a paramedic and a firefighter, even though I'm retired, I still have a first responder mindset in almost every situation. As you know,
you can't turn it off. Can't turn it off.
You can't turn it off. Sometimes it drives me, it not drives me crazy, but it kind of gets on my nerves sometimes because I'm like, I have to tell myself, stop thinking like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's not a wrong thing when it happens. It's just sometimes you get so caught up in that, and it's like, okay, wait, okay, and then you kind of retool or you rethink the processes that you've been whatever, or even how much you're going to be involved in something that you see or whatever.
Right.
So you're going to tell us about your story, your personal story, dealing with DV, and this is going to go into this book that you have penned. Again, I'm going to give you the mic to let us get a visual of your experience and how that led you to the course of becoming a lawyer, becoming a law enforcement personnel, becoming a advocate for those who have been victimized by these traumas. The mic is yours, sir.
All right. Well, before I present, I've learned that sharing my background is traumatizing to others. First, I think it's important to bring up secondary trauma. As a first responder, social worker, law enforcement, EMS, even if the trauma has not occurred to you, just working in that field can be traumatizing because, like you said at the very beginning, you bring that home with you. So some of what I say may serve as a trigger for something that you experienced or something someone you know may have experienced. If you need to exercise some self-care, please feel free to do that. But I grew up in California. My father was an angry and abusive alcoholic. My mom was a survivor of child sexual abuse and domestic violence, and I think she was misdiagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. So my father would often weaponize this mental disorder she was diagnosed with against her. So whenever she did try to run away, when law enforcement came, my very articulate Caucasian father would show her meds and say, "Oh, she's crazy," and law enforcement would put her in an institution. There was a cycle that happened, like every 6 months or so, my mom would run away from this. And generally speaking, when my mom would run away, my father still liked to have sex, and so he would be having sex with my older sister. And her story is hers to share, but I was very much aware of that because my father was very physically aggressive to me. And as one of my coping modalities, when I would try to go to sleep at night, I would bang my head on a pillow. And it's something I used to get in trouble for. So I would wait up until everyone else went to sleep so I didn't get in trouble for that. And that's when I would see my father come in and have sex with my older sister. And it was just something that happened again and again. And we had Child Protective Services, law enforcement, school authorities contacting us frequently, but they would never take me out of that situation. So I learned very quick to lie. Like if I didn't say what I was supposed to before they got there, I would be in so much trouble afterwards. So, I think of being an attorney as kind of trial theater with a mix of manipulation. I learned that as a child as a defense mechanism, because whenever someone came or contacted us, my goal was to redirect them. And then sometimes I would come up with a story to tell my father so he doesn't beat me further. It's like, I can make CPS go away, I promise. And I would sell my ass off. Excuse my language. I hope that's okay.
No. This is the Trigger Want to Talk podcast. You say what it is what you say. Like, we don't do like fluff is an action word. That's what you do to pillars and shit. So you say it all.
Yeah. So, I would do my best to try to get them to go away. But the abuse continued to escalate. It got worse and worse. It did not culminate with the death of my mom. At age 13, I learned what rigor mortis was because my mom once again tried to escape out the bedroom window. And this has been one of the hardest things for me to talk about. Like, I became an attorney before I was comfortable talking about this, and I'll tell you why in a moment, and have this conversation with a federal magistrate judge, because as a child, my father let me back up one more second. When you are a survivor, a victim of domestic violence and child abuse, you often will do what your abuser tells you to do without a lock being on the door or anything, without them having to coerce you in the moment, because that fear of what has happened in the past reoccurring is always there. So if my father told me to put my hand in a fire, I would do so, because if I failed to do so, he's going to beat the crap out of me and then put my hand on the fire anyway. So I'm going to do it. So it's this idea of kind of blind obedience. So this was another occasion with my father beating my mom, and she's crying and on the ground, he's kicking her and everything. And he tells us, myself and my two siblings, to go get belts and socks to tie my mother up. And I complied. and he tied her up. But after he got done tying her up, while she was laying down on the ground, her body in a hot-tie position, he jumped in up and down on the back of her head. And the next day, it was apparent that she had died. The coroner said it was homicide, asphyxiation by suffocation. But I learned what rigor mortis was as the fire department untied my mom, and her body was still in that hog-tied position, and they carried her out. And that, again, so one of the things I talk about with law enforcement is I'm 37 now, and I'm just now starting to disclose this stuff because I didn't trust authority. So that connection is very key, because there was information I had that would have helped them at the time, but I did not trust them. And so I didn't give them the tools they needed to put me in a safer place. So that's why I talk about connection so much. But after the fire department carried out my mom, I went to school the next Monday. I was in that home for 3 more months before we finally, 3 or 4 more months before we finally came into care. And only because my older sister tried to kill my father unsuccessfully and then tried to kill herself. So they actually took her first. She made disclosures of sexual abuse. And then they went ahead and took us all back into care. But even going over my records, it's like mind-boggling, because they brought my father in and interviewed him. He acknowledged the allegations of sexual abuse.
Okay.
Said he did it, gave additional details, and they let him leave the building. It was a week before they actually arrested him. And I have the records. So I use this in my training because, like, this type of stuff is still occurring. My story is not unique. I'm actually one of the lucky ones, because here I am, an attorney on this amazing podcast, being able to share my story and hopefully heal others. Not everyone is that fortunate, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier with domestic violence training for law enforcement. We're scheduling it 6 months out. Right. And our friend in common, she's drinking water from a fire hose at Children's Division. There are so many cases. I mean, in the trauma that you deal with that, like, I can't get to this hotline call because I got to go take care of my kids. And then you find out something worse happened because you weren't able to intervene. Right. They just had a bunch of investigators leave. And so all of that gets piled on the existing workers. And so you have people that are overworked, undercompensated. You have law enforcement that can't get the training they want. So you tell me that my situation isn't recurring. Someone is busy. They're on the 9th hotline call, working overtime. And so they don't see everything. And so then they don't put that kid in a safer place. So then that kid doesn't distrust authorities. And the next time they don't disclose. And so we don't even have the tools to help them. So that's why I'm driven to try to make an impact. You know, even if it's just one case at a time, it's saving lives and changing family trees. I'll give you my back. Sorry.
No. This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. We're sponsored by Anchor, produced by my company, Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We are streaming everywhere you get your favorite podcasts. You can watch these interviews also on Spotify. You don't have to have the paid version. You use the free version. Or our YouTube channel, which is the company name, Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We're talking with very special guests, former law enforcement attorney, author Albert Grieve. He is talking to us about domestic violence, traumas. We're going to be talking about dads and the law. You know, Albert, first I want to give you my condolences. I also want to thank you for having the candor, the courage, and the compassion to share your story with the audience here. When I listen to you talk, I'm so engaged, and here's why. Not only from a first responder perspective, but you're such a great humanitarian, because you could have focused anything in the law. I mean, you know, as you know, if you have a law degree, you pretty much can write your own ticket.
You could.
You know, I mean, like, literally, like, you can write your own ticket, and you can focus on criminal law, you can focus on civil law, international law, like, whatever. And so for you to say, I could be balling out of control as a lawyer, you know, you're like, I want to focus on helping people. I want to focus on those that can't help themselves. I want to focus on those that have been victimized, have been traumatized, that are going through the shit that we call the system. You know, because when you talk about the system, nobody talks about it favorably. You talk about the law, that might be different. When you say the system, most people have a shit mentality. Yeah. I'm glad that you're highlighting the plight of the caseworkers, the case managers that were your coworkers from Children's Division. Now, again, folks, some of the things that you're going to hear us say are Missouri-based terms. When I say hotlining, I'm talking about calling Child Protective Services. If I say DFS, that's kind of the equivalent of Child Protective Services.
There are still judges that use that here in Missouri.
Yeah.
And I don't usually correct the judge.
So some of these terms are specifically used for people that come from Missouri. So don't get it twisted or like, what are they talking about or whatever. It's all about Child Protective Services when we're talking about this or whatever. And my flowers go out to people like our common partner, coworker, and the staff of those that work for Child Protective Services, because, you know, I know the hours that they put in. I know the you know, working the overtime and having like resources and, you know, I mean, you going on these scenes that are horrific. I've had to call, you know, you guys on 911 calls. I remember distinctly there was a call that we got some years ago where the mom called. She had 2 little kids. Her and the kids' dad, they do this exchange of the kids like every other weekend. And so he gets them on the weekends. Well, when she got them back that Sunday afternoon, she saw that the kids had bruises on them. And when she talked to them, they told her that, you know, he beat them and stuff or whatever. So she calls 911, police show up, EMS shows up and everything. And, you know, we take the report, we check the kids out and all this stuff. We transport them to the hospital. But I remember being on scene calling, you know, Child Protective Services. And, you know, I did a hotline call, you know, and I called my supervisor and I was like, look, I got to hotline this case. We're going to be on scene for a while or whatever. And so I know there are other situations where Child Protective Services have not always been doing their due diligence. Like the case of Christian Ferguson that I was telling you about the other day. That case was adjudicated in on Court TV, Missouri versus Ferguson, where the dad, DeJuan Ferguson, was convicted of of Christian Ferguson's death. His body hasn't been found to this day. This happened back in 2003 when he was missing. And the reason I bring it up is because even in that case, they highlighted a lot of the problems that were not really being focused on with Child Protective Services. We're mandated reporters being licensed for the job that we do. You're on duty 24/7, even if you're not on the clock. If I'm out at the mall and I see a kid getting abused, I'm mandated to report that. I can't be like, oh, I'm gonna wait till I get to work and then report it. Right. Is that correct?
Yeah, no. And so when we're on this point, I want to touch on a couple of things you said. So again, I'm never trying to throw salt at like law enforcement or social workers, because I put on the uniform. So I've been that cop that nobody wants unless they call me, and then I don't get there quick enough, right? And social service is just the same way. You know, I put on those legal aspects trainings for workers, and I see them, they still have to manage their caseload. So if something comes up, they're stepping outside of the class to take a phone call and deal with some hot button issue. And then they're missing the legal aspects training I'm providing, right? Not only that, but you have such a high turnover because it doesn't pay you well. You deal with the secondary trauma, but then you're not really being compensated. You bring all this home with you, and then for what? Like, it's like you can't give your family the life you want, right? I just to get the letters behind my name, I have a lot of background in this area, but it's more criminal law and actual life experience. I don't have the social work educational side. So I was looking at like with BSW, just to add that to JD, it's like $80-something thousand, right? And that's without interest. And then they're going to get paid $30-something thousand to work at Children's Division. And so you have this constant turnover. So you may have someone that doesn't necessarily have the best training because they're unable to, and they're new, and they show up to this case and they miss stuff. And in missing stuff, we're not protecting kids, right? And so they're not dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And not only that, but just the volume of work that they have. And then when you go to court, right, you have to know your stuff. But the attorneys, there's high turnover rate there too. Like when I was at Division of Legal Services, like everybody in the office, except for one person, switched over. When I did one of my termination of parental rights cases, I was the 4th attorney on that case. It had been continued for over a year, like set for hearing, right, to terminate parental rights and free up a child for adoption. There were 9 different social workers that handled that case. I had to like track down the first social worker, subpoena them and get them prepped, and then the current one, and just hope I could bridge the gap in between using those 2 social workers. And we prevailed, and we did termination of parental rights and stuff. But yeah, no, so that education is really, really key. So I really am careful to throw salt or, shade on social workers because I understand their plight. And to me, I think it's more of a societal issue, right? Because although there are issues within Children's Division that I think can be fixed and they're working on it, if you're the captain of a tugboat in the middle of the ocean, there's only so much you could do, right? If it takes a village to raise a child, what does it take to raise and nurture a child that's been abused or neglected? Right. So I think us talking about it and increasing awareness is so key because we'll shine a spotlight on it, right? Put some light on the darkness, and maybe we can get some more funding, more awareness, and we can start to prevent some of these issues. Because once the harm has happened, man, I'm telling you, you live with that for life. It never goes away. Even if you're in the system, once you come out of care doesn't leave you, right? So the best thing we could do for trauma is to prevent the situations that created it in the first place. And you said something else, and I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. Because my mind, I'm like mind mapping right.
There's so much we could talk about, right? There's so many different directions we can go.
I know, and I'm gonna have you back because like we're just scratching the surface here. Okay, so I want to go back to your story because we always talk about what was your rock bottom moment, and I'm not talking about from a blood and guts perspective or whatever, because we focus on healing and recovery and resolutions and different things like that on this podcast with everybody we talk to. For you, what happened that made you say, enough is enough, I'm going to do something different to fight against these traumas that I'm experiencing? So
I think when you say rock bottom, my mind kind of went somewhere else. So let me answer in a slightly different way. That's okay. Sure. If you want to come back with a question. The rock bottom moment for me, when I think of rock bottom, if you deal with this type of stuff, it's like when you decide that it's no longer worth fighting, like to live anymore. Mm-hmm. That was after my father killed my mom. Okay. And I could talk about the abuse all day long. That's fine, verbal and everything, because you heal. But when he decided to use me for a different type of abuse, that I'm still like working on trying to talk about it. That to me was just about the end. Like I could not go on much longer. Okay. But once I got out of that environment and it became safe, then all the energies I'd used to try to survive, I could put toward working on myself and improving and starting to thrive. And so it's like that children's book I wrote. That's like the whole thought behind it, right? Yeah. I think every child, every survivor, a person in a relationship, they have seeds of resiliency. And if we could put them in the right environment, they could flourish. And so that's kind of why I wrote that children's book. But as soon as I got out, I started working toward trying to prevent people. So like even in high school, all my scholarship essays talk about, I thought I was going to be a prosecutor, put bad guy in jail, like put my father in jail. That's everything I did. And that was the direction as criminal law for quite a while, up until I got out of law school and I learned about juvenile law, because you really don't learn about this stuff in actuality until you get in that field. So I would say as soon as I got into my first group home, I was already working toward trying to prevent other people from going through what I've gone through. But I do want to say this. I was in a clubhouse room the other day, and people like myself sometimes are trying to give back and prevent others from going through what we went through, but it could either be from a position of healing, and I'm misquoting this, or projecting from like our wounds. And so I'm kind of in that latter camp because I haven't quite worked on myself yet. Up until now, I'm just running, right? Just keep moving forward. I mean, law enforcement, attorney, everything. I just keep moving forward. I'm trying to run from my past. Problem is the past is within me, right? And so that's one of the things I've been focusing on now is trying to shift to that the mantra of like healing, right? Like to be the best father and husband I could be requires me to be healthy, like mentally healthy. And so that's something I'm working on. So do you mind if I share this real quick? The
mic is yours, sir.
All right, so this is a children's book I wrote, Little One, You Are Loved. And it is designed to help children who have been in the type of situation that I've been in, right? They internalize the negativity around them and they don't have the emotions to work through it. And so they may lash out or engage in self-destructive behavior. And so it's to try to teach them it's not their fault the world is blowing up around them. And also to help caregivers or placement providers understand the depths of some of the kids they may invite into their homes, right? You have these really caring people that want to open up a forever home, and then they get a child that's cussing them out and punching holes in the wall. Right. And trying to understand that, like, they don't know how to work through what's going on. They don't know who they can trust. And so they may intentionally try to push people away. But if you could survive that storm, if you could penetrate their impenetrable defenses, then maybe they'll start to open up. And so it's a story talking about all of these things. It's a child that went through something kind of bad, and in the right home, when they have parents that say, I love you, I'm proud of you, I appreciate you, they can start to thrive. But I also was really intentional in this book to kind of leave gaps, because I'm a practitioner at heart. And so if this is read with a child, and that child starts filling in the gaps, then that's a point of inquiry in a trained environment, a clinical setting by a trained professional, to say, So in this story, it didn't say dad was bludgeoning mom. Let's explore that a little bit, right? So I'm trying to create a tool to aid others. But the whole point of this book is trying to get a child or survivor on that path to healing a whole lot sooner, because they shouldn't have to wait till they're in their mid-30s like myself. So
I want you to give us a short excerpt from that book, Little One, You Are Loved.
Okay.
Anywhere in the book.
All right, I'm just going to go toward the end of the book.
Okay.
They showered little one with so much care, giving all the love and time could spare. What amazing things all this love could do. Now little one bloomed and once again grew. So a lot of people that deal with trauma may lag developmentally. Right. So like, for instance, this book, I initially intended to be from age 3 to like 10. But our friend in common said, no, it can actually go to preteen, because a lot of people that deal with that type of stuff will not be as far along developmentally. And so they could still connect to that story. So in this story, when the trauma started happening to little one stopped growing. They stopped developing. Right. And it wasn't until they were in a loving, caring, nurturing environment that they started developing again. They started progressing. Because that's another thing that we struggle with. Like, if we don't deal with that trauma, if we don't put you in a better place so you can start to heal, you kind of freeze frame where you left off. Your brain cannot progress. And so it's another reason why it's so important to intervene as soon as possible, to try to right the wrongs, start the process of healing.
I'm glad that you said that, because it makes me think about, when you're traumatized, a lot of people mentally, whatever age that you were traumatized, you're still at that age. I know people in my family who are older than I am. I'm 52, that were traumatized when they were younger, when they were teenagers, and they still have that teenage mentality because they didn't develop mentally, emotionally mature. Right. Even though they got physically older. Right. And so when we talk about trauma, there's this famous book, The Body Keeps the Score. And so for someone like you, who not only experienced these traumas, but you also have written about them, you also have professionally dealt with these traumas from a law enforcement perspective, from a legal eagle perspective. For those that don't know, legal eagle is a term that people refer to for lawyers. So as a legal eagle, you've dealt with these situations. As a dad, what have you done, and what do you do to talk to your children about you and your story?
So it's a really interesting question, because for the most part, I have not. My oldest is 17, and he knows the most, but it's still superficial. So it's just like when I was sharing my story earlier, I understand it can cause trauma. So me sharing my childhood with my children, I think, could be harmful. And so I'm working on trying to find that balance and what is okay. Absolutely. Because my oldest is 17, he's becoming an adult. and he wants to know. So I do want to be able to answer his questions, but there's no handbook on this, and so I'm kind of feeling as I go. And I want to know that I feel like I can trust him, because I think that if I don't answer his questions, he feels like I don't think he's old enough or I don't trust him, and that's not the case. I just don't want to cause harm. And so I don't have an answer for you on that. I'm still working through that. I have an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I will tell you they don't know anything.
That's the answer, though. No, I'm glad that you're saying that. This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, sponsored by Anchor, produced by Penn Consulting Solutions, LLC. If you're triggered at any point during this conversation, please call 911 if you need help immediately. If you don't, we got a ton of resources listed in every show notes. It'll be for this episode as well as any previous episodes. We're talking with Albert Grieve, attorney at law, former law enforcement, former first responder, former employee for Children's Division in Missouri, or what most people call CPS, Child Protective Services, all of those things. We're having a conversation about domestic violence, traumas, dads, and the law. Albert, I'm a dad. I have 6 children with my ex-wife. We had 5 boys and 1 girl in that order. When I was, and she and I got married twice. We met as teenagers. We got married the first time in 97, and we divorced in 02, and then we remarried in 04. We separated in 09, and we got officially divorced in 2013. During that time of the second divorce, I went through a number of things where my parental rights were being restricted, not by the state, not by the court, by the mom. When I tell my story, I tell people everything that I'm telling you, whether it's you, Albert, or anybody else, is backed up. You can go to CaseNet and look at my story. So I'm not telling you any falsities, any lies, anything like that. I'm not being disparaging.
We're from the Show Me State. That's why I use my records too. Got to back it up. Yeah,
we're from the Show Me State. So he said it. Thank you, sir. Yeah. So what I'm telling you is you can look it up. My case was very different in the fact that there's not a lot of men that, especially from Missouri, that get sole legal and sole physical custody of their kids. Especially when the mom was not a substance abuser. She was not an alcoholic. She had some issues with domestic violence against the kids, which is how my case started when we first separated during the second divorce. And so Children's Division got involved because the kids were hotlining her, saying she's keeping us away from the food in the refrigerator, like she put a lock on it. Then there was another time where she threw an iron at one of my son's head, an iron. And then she tried to run over a couple of our kids with the van on one instance. And so I was going back and forth with Children's Division. I'm talking about I was going to war with Children's Division. And it got to a point where I'm just going to say it. I threatened them. I said, you can take it how you want. Let me get another phone call about something happened to my kids and you guys haven't stepped in to do what you're supposed to do. Because what's going to happen next? Y'all going to call me and say, come identify these children or whatever. Like it got that serious. And so the state, you guys stepped in, and when I say you guys, I'm talking about Children's Division, stepped in and did what they call a voluntary placement. So what they said to me was, legally, we can't give you custody of these kids. But because of her actions and our investigation, we find her totally culpable for the shit that she was doing. We're going to put them in your custody. Now, you guys are married, so you got to go through divorce court and family court, and the judge will determine legally who has physical custody, legal custody, all of that stuff or whatever. So that's how my case started during the second separation, but before the second divorce began. for me, and this is where you come in. What do you say about that process? Because they didn't give me all the kids. They only gave me 4 of the kids. And in my situation, the reason I didn't get the 2 younger ones, which I was really livid about, was because she had the 2 little ones in the car when she tried to run over 2 of our boys. And my stance was, because what they told me was, well, she didn't do anything to them. And I'm like, well, I mean, she ran into a light pole trying to hit our sons or whatever. She put them in just as much danger as the ones that she was trying to hit. And I never understood how they weren't able to give me the 2 little ones in that situation. What do you say, sir?
All right. Well, man, I like this, but first, as an attorney, the disclaimer I give is I'm really cautious about hearing one person's side of the story and not the other, and giving some legal advice. So none of this is designed to be legal advice.
And this is past, so we're not talking.
No, yeah. I get you. I just want to speak in general too, because like even when I was training legal aspects and I wasn't representing children's division at the time, I have a social worker come and give me their story, but I don't have the whole picture. I don't have the whole file. You know. That being said, it's per child, each and every child. Like a parent has a constitutionally protected right in a relationship with their child. When I'm doing a termination of parental rights hearing, the case law says that is the equivalent of the civil death penalty, to lose rights in your child. And so we hold that to the highest standards, right? And so it's for each and every child. If I'm going to take a kid away from you, I got to prove by clear and convincing evidence in civil court. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not going
clear and convincing evidence. Okay.
Clear and convincing evidence, right? For civil, that you've harmed the child and the child shouldn't be there, and without going too deep into the law. And so when Children's Division is removing each and every child, they have to be able to prove for each and every child. Not only that, but for you don't have kids that are in care. So it's not the state of Missouri that's really dealing with it. You have to go to civil court. And as you know, you're on the docket with everybody else and every other issue. And so say if she gets a new attorney, then they get a continuance because they're looking. So it's a very lengthy, difficult process. And Children's Division is caught up in the middle. A lot of times Children's Division is weaponized, because if you make that hotline call and certain things are said, then we have timeframes for which we must be able to respond, and we have to infringe on your life and come in your home and then do all these investigations. And it could be very frustrating if you're on the receiving end and you're not doing anything wrong, right? And if you don't have kids in care, if there's not a reason for Children's Division to remove those 2 younger kids, maybe they got all the facts, maybe they didn't. Maybe it's one of those people that were new and they don't have the right training. I don't know without seeing the file, right? So if they're not state custody, then you're reliant on that divorce court or the family law court with that judge. And if you're like, say, in the city of St. Louis, the docket is immense and cases get continued and all this type of stuff. So in the moment, you're like, I just want to have a relationship with my child and no one is hearing me. But it's for all those reasons that we discussed, right? All these moving parts that must be able to work together, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they clash, and so it makes the process a whole lot more difficult. But just know, if you actually did nothing wrong and someone is trying to take your child, know that those same protections afforded your wife would be afforded you. Children's Division is, they call Children's Division the baby snatchers, but like my case shows, they don't snatch. They really don't. It's got to be so egregious for a kid to come into care. And you've got all this harm that has transpired before you come into care. So I think it's important to try to see a situation from all sides, right? So fortunately, you were able to get 4 of your kids, and I believe afterwards you got your other 2. Hopefully no harm befell them in between. But if there was, being able to come on a platform and share that so we can inform practitioners so those mistakes aren't made. But just know that the relationship that a parent has with a child is constitutionally protected, right? And so there's all these rights that they're afforded, and we don't want to make bad case law, right? So like, say Children's Division took a child and they got it wrong, then the court is going to further restrict, further hamstring what Children's Division can do. And so then you may have more situations like mine where they're not taking a child and they really should. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to consider. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Okay. And when we have people like Albert on or other professionals, they're giving their opinion. They're not representing anybody that's on the platform, including myself. He's not a compensated endorser or anything like that. He doesn't represent me, doesn't represent the show or whatever. This is just me giving him an example of what I went through in my situation with our children uh, during a separation that turned into a second divorce and all this stuff. 'Cause my story is really more even expansive than that, because that was back in 2009. You fast forward to 2013 when I actually filed for divorce the second time, because I filed for divorce the first time we had split up, and we end up getting joint legal and joint physical custody. And so for the next 6 months, she kept violating the terms of the divorce decree. We were in court every month, Albert. When I say we were in court every month, sometimes we were in court twice a month, because she kept, I'm talking about, when I say she violated everything in the divorce decree, because she was mad that she didn't get sole legal custody because she wanted to move to Baltimore. And the judge said, first of all, you've been keeping these kids, and we're talking about the younger too, because I had the older four all those years from 09 through 13. You've been keeping these kids away from the dad for no reason at all. For no, like, I wasn't getting hotlined or none of that stuff. Like, nothing was happening. You've been keeping these kids away all this time, not only from their dad, but the paternal side of their family, for no reason. And so, and these kids were born in Missouri. You know, we're not going to take them from their home state. And because she wanted me to sign over my rights so she could move. I'm like, first of all, I don't know. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be a summertime dad. You live 30 minutes away from me, and I haven't been able to see the kids hardly at all. You think I'm going to trust you, and you're 1,500 miles away or whatever, 1,000 plus miles away in Baltimore? Like, stop. And the judge agreed. So when we got the divorce decree, and we got, everything was split down the middle pretty much, she started violating the divorce decree. So in January of 2014, because we got divorced July 2013, I filed a motion to modify to get sole legal and sole physical custody. So for the next 9 months, from January through September, she got her rights restricted. She was on supervised visitation. And again, this was not about her beating the kids. She wasn't drinking and using drugs and all this stuff. She was strictly violating the divorce decree. So it created this whole domino effect. And even with her getting her rights restricted, I mean, she was getting 1 to 2 hour visitations a week supervised. Nothing ever improved. So in September of 2014, they made it a permanent order. And I had that up until May of 2019.
Okay.
For me, and I share that story with people because, again, it's not too often that you see a man having sole legal and sole physical custody of their kids. Now, here's where the domestic violence kicked in also again. So during this time that I got sole legal and physical custody now it exacerbated the situation because she's pissed with a capital piss. Right. That she doesn't have pretty much any rights. I mean, she was only getting them every Sunday for 7 hours. And we would do the exchange down at the one of the court buildings initially. That didn't work because she was not following the order, again. So we had I think a total of 4 different places that we did the exchange for the kids. And so as this is going on, she's hotlining me about stuff. Oh, he's spanking the kids. Oh, he's doing this. Oh, it was nothing. It was all this. It was no sexual. It was no sexual accusations or none of that stuff. It was strictly she was accusing me of being physically abusive to the kids, or he's interfering with me having communication with them, which it was clearly listed in our divorce decree how the communication worked, and I was following it to the letter.
Yep.
I was like, you put yourself in this position to get all these restrictions. I'm not going to do anything above that because I attempted to do that a number of occasions, and it would always come back on.
Yeah.
She might be compliant the first couple of times and then go back to not being compliant. My question to you is, for you being so put on your legal hat. For you, legally speaking, when you hear about that, just that situation, without knowing all the other stuff, what do you say, or what would you say to other men in those situations? Because for me, I learned a couple of important lessons. A lawyer is only as good as their client. That was the main thing that I learned. Document everything.
That's what I was going to say. That's the number one. I would put that number one.
You can.
That's what makes you. Yeah, this documentation is key. So let me put it to you like this: How many times was the judge at the exchange with you? Never. Right. So how are they going to know what's happening without evidence? That documentation is evidence. And when you have a situation like this, you're going to have both parties attempting to weaponize the legal system. And so, yeah, the more hotlines she could rack up on you, the worse person she makes you look like. And it takes a while for those investigations, right? You have at least 45 days for the investigation, everything. So it just drags everything out, right? But they start stacking it up. She's making an argument like, oh my God, it's been hotline 30 times, right? And so documentation is your best friend, and understand that it's going to be a lengthy process. The more contentious it is, the more there's going to be fighting in court, and there's going to be continuance and the opportunity to review evidence, right? Every time you submit something to court, I want to see what it is, and I need an opportunity to review it. And if you have an attorney that's busy, they're going to have new evidence come to light. They're going to ask a judge for continuance and everything. So documentation, and really kind of trying to keep an eye on that. What you may think is documentation, like your hand notes on a napkin, that's a good start, but that's not going to be as sufficient, right? So having text messages and video recordings and all that type of stuff, audio recordings. There are free apps you could download on your phone that will record every single conversation, right? So that's how you help your attorney. Like, don't just say, well, she told me this. Show me. This is a show me state, right? So that is the number one thing. Documentation, and then weather the storm. Because remember, the courts are going to try. Like the starting point in any dispute is joint legal and joint physical. And as you guys know, physical is like where the child stays. Legal is decision-making capabilities, what school they go to, medical decisions, stuff like that, right? They want to try to let both parents be parents unless we could show them why that's not safe for the kids. And then we'll work all the way down from there. But documentation, I would say that is the number one key. You make it really simple. Documentation, everything, not just your word, not just you writing it down on a napkin, but get recordings, get videos, get as much as you can, get witnesses. The more evidence you can give your attorney, the easier the case will be. Because honestly, like when I represented Children's Division in court, my best day is when I can come to an agreement with the attorneys before going on the record. And the judge loves that. And so if I have a mountain of evidence, I'm going to go to that opposing attorney and say, hey, look, I'm going to hammer you on this, and that, unless we can come to an agreement. And judges love that too. So that's how you can help your attorney be the most effective attorney, because they can probably come up with a lot of agreements before we actually go on to record. It's just we'll go on the record and the judge will make it official.
I'm so glad you're saying this, because, Albert, I would come into court. When you talk about amount of evidence, I would document everything. And like you said, there are a lot of free apps and resources. My friend was talkingparents.com. So for anybody that is dealing with custody issues, whether you're married or not, no matter how many kids you have in common or not, if you're dealing with a custody situation, talkingparents.com is a website. It's a free site, but they do have some optional a la carte items that you can pay for, but the site itself is free. There's some additional things that you can pay for to give you additional ways to record things or document things or whatever. But the free portion of it does pretty much everything you need it to do. You can go onto this site, and again, I'm not a compensating endorser or anything like that. I'm just telling you about the resource that I use and that's available. And it doesn't matter what state you live in. So I would use talkingparents.com to, instead of texting her, I would just use that because she's going to get an alert because you put your email address in. So she's going to get an alert just like if she was to get a text message. Everything is time stamped on the Talking Parent site. You can't go in and delete anything. Once you hit send or submit or whatever it is, it's there and it's time stamped. So even if you make a mistake, you can always go in and type in addendum or whatever. You know, hey, I put in the wrong healthcare information or something like that. You can upload dental cards, vision cards, medical cards, and all that stuff. So if the person, you know, if you have a problem with seeing them physically and all this stuff, you can upload copies of that stuff. You can upload other pictures. There's a calendar that you can that's available where you can put, hey, you know, our kid has a soccer meet or whatever, or dance recital, or daughter daily dance, or whatever the situation is. You can leave detailed messages to the other parent, co-parent, or whatever you want to call them, him or her. These websites and apps, and you can Google or go to the Apple Store and find whatever works for you. But I like the Talking Parent site because I would document everything. And I always say to guys, don't get into this back and forth arguing, because especially if you're not documenting, you know, anybody can say, hey, I can get on the phone with Albert and he can say, LP was yelling and screaming at me the whole time, even though we weren't arguing. And people are like, huh? They only can believe you until they hear the other side, like you were saying, or have an option of, you know, am I going to believe you or not?
Right.
And what I tell dads also is you have to bring in this stuff or whatever. This is not your attorney's responsibility,
Right.
to document all this stuff. Your attorney, I don't care how much you pay your attorney, they're not gonna gather all this information. That's your job. That's why I say a lawyer is only as good as their client. Because I would go in the court out and I'd be there early. I'd be super briefcase or my expandable file folder and stuff. I got a mountain of shit in there. You know, yeah. I used to have so much stuff that they wouldn't even look through everything.
So let's go there for a second. So that website you brought up is wonderful, because our first step is going beyond he said, she said, right? Going beyond a napkin, having some recordings or something. Well, just because you think it's evidence doesn't necessarily mean a judge will think it's evidence. So guaranteeing, being able to prove that it is authentic, that it is genuine. That's why that website is helpful, because that, I would assume, going through that website, you would have some assurances that this is legitimate and that you did not fake it, and you can't. Because don't think people haven't been able to create audio recordings that didn't exist and edit things. I mean, you're getting ready to edit this video, right? So, I mean, that would be the next step, right? If we want to start first, like someone at the entry level, just making sure that you have documentation in general, right? That's better than nothing, because you'll be surprised how many people don't have the documentation. They get hammered just because they can't prove what they said and the other person has it, right? A picture is 1,000 words. How much is a video? So on and so forth. But then if you want to take it to that next level, ensuring that it is something that would be admissible in a court of law would be key. So yeah, some of these resources like the one you mentioned, I wholeheartedly recommend.
Absolutely. Here's one thing that I did. There was a time we did an exchange, and so I had to get the kids to her house on Wednesday mornings. I used to have to be at work at 7 a.m. She lives 20 minutes from my job, but it would take me about 30 minutes to get to her house. So I would get the kids up about, 5 o'clock, get them, suited and booted, fed and all that stuff or whatever. And I would drop them off to her. And then I would go to work. Well, she started not coming to the door expeditiously. And it would be 5 minutes, it'd be 7 minutes, 10, and one day she didn't even show up at the door. She had a post-it note on the door that said, don't knock on the doors or the windows, because she lived in this multi-unit apartment building and stuff or whatever. I'm not here. You got to deal with the kids or whatever. And she knew I had to go to work that day. Right. And so, I called my attorney and let her know and all this stuff. And she was like, okay, we're going to go back to court on this. I took a picture of the door with the note on it. I did a close-up with the note, and it showed her apartment number on there and stuff. And I had the note. So when we went to court, because she was denying all this stuff. I
Right.
was like, Your Honor, I had to call my job. I had letters from my job saying that I had took off and all this stuff, and why? Because it was a, we would get you got 10 instances at work. So as long as it was a no call, no show, you could either, if you were late or you didn't come into work,
Right.
as long as it was a no call, no show,
Yeah.
you got up to 10 of those or whatever. So I had to report that and stuff or whatever. And so she was denying all this stuff. What I was like, Your Honor, I got the note. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah. So I gave the note to my attorney, and she had all the text messages that because I was texting her back and forth, like, hey, where are you? Why aren't you opening the door and all this stuff? So when the lawyer gave the judge the note, he looked at that note. He had to take a 15-minute recess because he was so upset. Because, again, she's still being non-compliant with his rules and stuff.
And he's trying to protect the kids, right? Looking at it from the child's perspective. If the parents aren't actually harming the child, you want that child to maintain that relationship with their parent, right? But she's making it so hard, right? And then you're in this position, like, look at the damage that's being caused. But that judge is sitting there as the decider and is trying to balance all these things simultaneously. So yeah, no, I can understand why they took a recess.
Yeah, it was. I'm telling you, man, that right there was a key turning point. Yeah. And that's one of the things that started the wheels to turn in my head. I might have to file for a motion to modify. I didn't want to do that.
Right.
It took her keeping the kids over a Christmas break. She didn't return them when she was supposed to. That was the last straw for me. That was that rock bottom moment for me. Yeah. When we're talking about the law, and we're talking about situations with domestic violence or sexually based offenses, for you putting your legal hat back on, when you have conversations with other law enforcement officials or people that work, your peers, when you're doing these seminars and different things, what are the top 3 things that you say to them that they need to be keenly aware of and always have in the forefront of their mind as practitioners in their jobs?
I'll answer that in just a second. I want to go back to what you were saying, your story, just a moment. You said you waited until the last straw. I would encourage you to take action with the very first infraction, because what if your last straw isn't viewed as a big deal by the court, right? If you've gone this far along where you felt you've being wronged and you just now take action, well, you may not get the remedy you're seeking. So I know it's hard, but I would encourage you to get that documentation, go to court at the very first infraction, because you never know how many more there are going to be, right? So you yourself could delay the process if you're trying to deal with it as opposed to taking action. So that'd be my suggestion there. As far as
hold on a second. So what I said is, we were in court for 6 months after the divorce, and sometimes multiple times every month, because I was doing that.
Right.
Every time there was an infraction, we were in court about it. The last straw thing was just about me filing the motion to modify, because I was like, I don't really want to do that. I want to, I'm hoping that she'll stop this shit. Because again, for 6 months we're in court. That last incident, and I reported it just like the other ones throughout that 6 months, was, okay, I don't know what else to do. I mean, we're reporting it, we're going to court and all this stuff. Like, something's got to give. And so my attorney said, we can't stop her from doing what she's doing, but what we can do is make it harder for her to do these things, because you would have sole custody of the kids.
Right.
So that's
hindsight's 2020. Do you think you maybe looking at the end result, do you wish perhaps you would cross that bridge a little sooner?
If I could do it all over again, I would have filed probably 3 months earlier. So yes.
That's my only point. So you may not get the relief you're seeking. You may file a motion to modify, and maybe the judge thinks it's premature, but you've signaled, hey, I'm serious and I'm going to take care of my kids. This is what I'm going to do. And that gives you more ammunition, right? If you file 3 and they keep getting denied, well, a judge at a certain point may take it a little bit more seriously. That's all I'm saying. Because what you're doing first is you're having to convince yourself before you convince the judge. But if you're starting to get the facts enough to file the motion, you may want to go ahead and file the motion. It could get denied, but at least you show, hey, look, I'm serious and I want this. You know what I'm saying? So in your case, you could have maybe crossed that bridge like 3 months sooner, right? And the thing too, your attorney may not understand how the depths of the impact because you haven't expressed that. So again, we're sharing your story. You're the guinea pig, but we're trying to provide information to the audience. Yeah. Maybe don't deal with so much on your own. Maybe unload some of that stuff, give it to your attorney and put it in front of the judge, because you may get surprised. You may end up with a motion to modify a whole lot quicker than you thought. As far as practitioners, I know you said 3 things, but the number one thing I hammer when I start my presentation before I send my story is connection, right? Connecting with the people that you're trying to help, connecting the facts to the law, because I can't tell you, I sent you some chapters for the manuscript I'm working on. The documentation in and of itself doesn't make any sense. You read the facts and the conclusion does not compute. It's like 3 + 3 = 4. And they didn't connect the stuff that was right there in front of them, but they also didn't connect to their history, right? How many, like for instance, all the hotline calls that your wife was doing with you, right? Yeah. Someone be able to take a step back, like maybe 1, unsubstantiated, 2, unsubstantiated. Well, law enforcement taking action against someone may say, oh my God, we got 14 hotline calls and they're all unsubstantiated. This is taking resources away from those who need it most. This is a misuse of the system, and they might go ahead and take some action in that regard. Before practitioners, not just connecting with your history, but also connecting with other agencies. And I'll make that number 3, because you have the schools with Eyes on Kids. You have maybe a counselor, a therapist. You have law enforcement, fire department. The fire department knew my family because all the medical stuff, that's EMS coming, right? So right. EMS has documentation of injury that occurred between people in a domestic relationship. That's domestic violence. So there are times where EMS would respond, but not law enforcement, but that's still record. So then when you look at my story, taking a step back, you have all these different agencies that have all these pie pieces, and it doesn't take much to put it together and show, oh my God, this is domestic violence. Unfortunately, by the time they connected those dots, it was after a homicide and after you have 3 more months of things progressing. So connection is key. Connecting the facts to the law, connecting with the people you're trying to help, connecting to your own internal records and history and other agencies, right? That multidisciplinary team.
Albert, I'm going to have you come back, man, because otherwise we're going to be doing a 3-hour interview.
Yeah, look at the time. Yeah.
Look, man, I want to share with the audience, and I always tell people, you can listen to this podcast on any platform. We're streaming on all the major platforms. However, as an added bonus, I like doing the video options also. So you can watch probably 95% of our interviews on Spotify, and that's the free version at minimum, or our YouTube channel, Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. And the reason that I tell people that is when I have a guest on, I show their social media links that they have. I show if they have a book or they have a website or they have a YouTube channel or they have a Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever. I share that with the audience because it gives you a chance to kind of see what they put out there and all this stuff or whatever. And this is something that, they don't have a problem with either. It's not like I'm pulling up something, out of the woodwork or whatever. Yeah. And it also, I like watching podcasts if they have a video option available because it gives me a chance to kind of interact more with the guests. So,
can I ask a favor? Can you clip on that YouTube tab?
Oh yeah, I already got it.
Yeah, I see it up there. All right, so like this book that I made is 100% free. My 8-year-old son read the story, and I wanted to make it the message available to anyone. So this is 100% free. It's just a story about love and compassion and how you could take a child that's been through something bad and put them in a better place if they're in a caring and nurturing environment to show them that better days are ahead. So I'm not making any money by you watching this YouTube video, but hopefully I'm helping someone, and that's my goal. So if you do get a chance to watch this, please like and subscribe and share the message so those that need to hear it most can see it. So, and I think it also shows that this is my whole goal. Is like, I don't want my kids to ever know what I had to deal with, and I don't wish my childhood on anyone. So having my 8-year-old read that story and share, like, something that will put a smile on other kids' face just shows that you can break the cycle of domestic violence and child abuse in a single generation.
I love that, Albert.
Appreciate
And
it.
man, I'm telling you, that is phenomenal. So the book is Little One, You Are Loved by Albert Grieve. And on his YouTube channel, which is Begin the New Cycle. I'll have the link for the YouTube channel and some other of his social media links in the show notes for this particular episode when it airs. I'm probably going to bump your episode up sooner than I plan on doing it. So your episode is probably going to come out the beginning of March of 2023.
Okay.
So probably the first or the second week of March. This is a very important topic, and it's very personal for me as well as Albert. We're talking about domestic violence, traumas, dads, and the law. And we've been talking about Albert's story as well as my story, dealing with domestic violence from different perspectives. And so I don't have any problems with letting people know, hey, I've been a victim of domestic violence on a number of different levels, especially when it involved my kids. Just like I've been accused of being the perpetrator of those things, and nothing ever came of that other than it was a fake allegation made by my ex-wife. You know, it was something that she was trying to do, one of those things where there's smoke, that there's fire, especially because I was a licensed paramedic, which made me a mandatory reporter. And for those that are not mandated reporters in Missouri, there's this family care safety registry that you have to sign up for. And it basically is kind of a monitoring database for anybody that deals with children or elderly. And it keeps track of vulnerable victims. Can you tell us about that? Can you tell us about the family care registry a little bit?
Central Registry. Yeah, so that's part of the work that I did for Missouri Children's Division. So whenever there's an allegation of abuse or neglect that comes in, if there's a substantiation of those allegations, then their name will be placed on the Central Registry, which is very important. Like for instance, I had a lady who was doing daycare, and she lived in Jefferson City, and she put a 2-year-old in a bathtub, threw some Pop-Tarts in the bathtub, closed the curtain, closed the door, and went to Columbia to go party. The parent tried to go pick up the child early, and no one was there, got law enforcement. They ended up making entry, and they left this poor child in a tub with pubic hair and Pop-Tarts. I mean, that's a sad story, but she was running a daycare. So when we substantiate those allegations, we put her on the Central Registry so that everyone would be aware of what she's doing in this type of stuff. So she can't go get a daycare job at the YMCA. Caveat being, this individual went to Texas and opened up a daycare facility there. And I tried to reach the authorities. Yeah, right. Our Central Registry is not connected with other states. So that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this, to increase awareness and to move that needle. I will also say this too. Another issue I have with the Central Registry is that your name never comes off. So unless you sue the state and your findings are overturned, then you can get the court to remove them. But if you are a dad and you get into a fight with your teenage son over something on their cell phone, and you shouldn't have done it, but it's one of those life things where we met the allegations, we could check the boxes, but this is not like someone who's doing a daycare and putting their child in a tub, then your name is forever on that Central Registry. So then if you decide to be a teacher, or you want to work in daycare, or you want to go work in a home health type setting, then you would be prevented from doing that. So this is my opinion, but I think we should have a tiered system based on the offense, and I think we should be able to connect with other states to a greater extent than we do. But we could talk about the Central Registry another day, right?
And more, because I didn't know that the Central Registry wasn't. They didn't have a network national.
And so I had a huge caseload, and I'm trying to take my own lunchtime to try to call people and text it to say, hey, this person just left a 2-year-old in a tub, and we can see on Facebook she's opened up a new daycare. So at least let people know that this is an individual that has done this. Now, if you decide that you're okay with your daycare provider putting your child in a tub and leaving them unattended, that's a decision that you would have to make, but at least giving that information. That's what the central registry is designed to do, is to provide this notice. But also, like, sometimes we get things wrong. So I think having some sort of a tiered system.
Absolutely.
So depending on the infraction, you would be on there for a tiered amount of time. But again, it's all about talking about increasing awareness, getting the public more involved so that our legislatures know what's going on, what the impact is, and making sure that whatever is intended to do is actually transpiring.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, folks. Sponsored by Anchor, produced by Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. We are streaming everywhere. You can watch these interviews on Spotify as well as our YouTube channel, Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. Our special guest is Legal Eagle, former law enforcement, former first responder, former children's division lawyer, Albert Grieve. He wrote a book called Little One, You Are Loved. It's a free video book that you can watch on his YouTube channel, which is called Begin the New Cycle. I'll have that link and some of his other social media links in the show notes for his episode, which is going to air probably either the first or second Thursday of March 2023. Albert, I'm definitely going to have you come back, brother, because we just scratched the surface. I always say we don't do iceberg conversations here. The iceberg is only 10% of what you can see. The 90% is under the water. So I always say we either going to flip that bad boy upside down and expose everything, or I got some scuba gear, let's deep dive. And that's what we started doing today. So we got some more deep diving that we're going to do on some upcoming episodes. And I just appreciate, again, your candor, your compassion, and your courage for not only doing the work that you do, for being an advocate for those that need advocacy, whether it's from the legal perspective and the children's division perspective. I want to thank you as a fellow Missourian. I want to also give you your flowers for being someone who has taken these traumas, and you have done some amazing work so far. Like, you're not done, and we're not done by leaps and bounds. I got so much respect and love for you, and I know that we're going to be networking and partnering on some upcoming projects, because that's what needs to happen. We love the kids. We love all the kids. And if we didn't, we'd be doing something totally different. And so from me to you, I'm going to show you something that Mrs. LP gave me. And I got one final question for you. So let me give you the question first. Okay. If you could write a letter or an email to little Albert at any age, what would you say?
It gets better. I might just keep it short and sweet, man, because I'm going to tell you, I had some very, very dark days, but the manuscript I'm working on right now, I started it and I'm going to end it with, if I could change anything in my past, I wouldn't. Because if I did, I wouldn't have met my wife of 17 plus years. I want to have my 3 kids. I want to be able to share with you right now. So it does get better. There are better days ahead.
Mrs. LP got me this plaque. It has the EMS Star of Life on it. It's hanging up in my office, so I just took it off the wall. It's behind me. It says, "Not all superheroes wear capes." People call me a hero or superhero because of the work that I've done in EMS. I've been awarded multiple clinical life-saving awards, published in major, articles like U.S. News and World Reports and different things like that. And so people always say, "Oh, you're a superhero." And I say, you know what? I don't consider myself one. I'm just a person. I'm just an ordinary person that has done some extraordinary things in some extraordinary situations. And I give this to you because I look at you as a superhero, because you have done some extraordinary things in some extraordinary situations. You're just an ordinary guy like me.
So I appreciate that, and I know what I'm generally supposed to do is say thank you, but like you, I don't view myself as a superhero. I mean, I'm just trying to make it through each day and try and give back a little bit. But I do thank you. Thank you very much.
Albert Grieve, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go to our last segment. I'm going to go ahead and let Albert get back to his day and to his kids and his family. We're going to cover this case of HATTIE Yvonne Jackson from the Charlie Project, and I'm just going to read the information because I don't have a video to play for you all. This case goes back to 1961. Mrs. LP is our resident true crime unsolved detective. She's a missing person expert. She's a rape advocate. She's just a great humanitarian. Even if I didn't know her personally, I know her story. Hattie Yvonne Jackson. And this comes from the Charlie Project. So she's been missing since July 21st of 61 from DC, DMV, which is Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. Classification is a non-family abduction. So again, we cover abductions, kidnappings, and runaways. Sex, female, race, black, age 6. She was 6 years old. Height at that time was 3 feet, 45 pounds. She was wearing a white long sleeve blouse, brown and white checkered shorts, pink sandals, and a blue hair ribbon. She was seen last in a dull blue gray older model Chrysler, probably a Plymouth, with yellow license plates. And the details of her disappearance was she was last seen in DC on July 21st, 61. That afternoon, she, her older brother, and some friends went to Rock Creek Park to play. They were swimming in the creek when a cop told them the water was polluted and they couldn't swim there. An unidentified man was sitting nearby, and after the officer left, he offered to drive the kids to another place 2 miles away where the water was clear and they could swim. The children declined his offer and kept playing. Then Hattie disappeared. No one had seen her leave. She hasn't been heard from again. Several witnesses reported seeing 2 young men help Hattie into a dull blue-gray older model Chrysler, possibly a Plymouth, with yellow plates near Rock Creek Park. Dogs tracked Hattie's scent to that area. The driver of the car matched the description of a man who offered to take Hattie and her friends for a ride. He was Caucasian, between 30 and 40 years of age, with a deep tan, dark brown hair, brushed straight back, and he wore a white t-shirt, gray trousers, a black belt, and sunglasses. He was about 5'9", had a muscular build. That person has never been identified. A sketch of him is posted with his case summary, and an extensive search of the area turned up no sign of Hattie. Her case remains unsolved. If you have any information, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, about the whereabouts of Hattie Yvonne Jackson, you want to contact the Metropolitan Police Department in DC. That's 202-727-9099. Again, 202-727-9099. I will have the link to the Charlie Project and Hattie's case in the show notes for this particular episode. I always want to say thank you. And in closing, live in awareness, never live in fear. Take a CPR, first aid, stop the bleed class, because we want you to be a by-doer instead of being a bystander. You will be an immediate responder, because I always say that it's not a matter of if, but when and where an emergency is going to happen. And what are you going to do? You could be victim, you could be victims, you could be somebody that's hurt, injured, dying, or dead. But we want you to be an immediate responder if you can be, until somebody like myself or like Albert, when we were active as a first responder, shows up and can give you that advanced care. So keep your head on the swivel. And if you need any help, help is available. This planet has 8 billion people on it with a B. If you live to be 1 million years old, you will never meet every living person on the planet. So don't feel like you're alone. Don't feel isolated. Don't feel like there's anybody that doesn't care. You have 2 people right here just talking about domestic violence and traumas and different things like that have been in that foxhole, that are still in that foxhole, and are willing to help in these situations. For Albert, I'm LP. This is the Trigger One to Talk. LP out.